Hi, and welcome back to the Mob Mentality Show. I'm Chris Lucian, and my co-host is Austin Chadwick. And today we have Clare Sudbery, who is here to talk to us a little bit about ensemble programming when training fledgling software engineers. And so, Clare, maybe you can give us a little bit of an introduction, and then we can get into the subjects.
Okay, thank you. So my name's Clare Sudbery. I've been a software engineer for 22 years. I've been a consultant for the last 5 years. I'm currently Academy Lead with Made Tech. We're a small UK-based consultancy. Our Academy is a 12-week program that we use to train up very inexperienced software engineers to help them to become consultants. Although actually, I'm only going to be doing that for a little bit longer because I'm about to move on to an exciting new career as a freelance technical coach.
All right, fantastic. Well, okay, so I'm really interested in this subject of using ensembling to introduce people to software development. You know, you say inexperienced. How inexperienced are they when they come into the program? You know, and what does success look like in the way that you do things?
That's a really good question. So in terms of how inexperienced they are, we don't ask for very much experience at all. All we ask for is that people have done some coding so that they know what it is and they know that they do want to do it, because we don't want them to start and then decide they hate it. But we don't ask that they've done it professionally. So we give them a very brief coding test where we just check that they can code. But that does mean that we actually end up with a very broad range. So we have people applying who've maybe done a boot camp and a little bit of self-learning, and that's it. But we also have people applying who actually have already maybe done a little bit of junior software engineering in a job. So we have that creates quite a broad range. There are people who are really very new and people who've actually been doing it for a while. And the next question, what does success look like? It's interesting. What basically our aim is that at the end of our 12 weeks, we will have people that we can put on projects with clients who will actually be able to be software engineers in a commercial environment. But we do tell our clients that we're giving them junior engineers. We don't make any pretense about that. So we certainly don't expect them to operate as senior engineers, for instance. We expect them to continue learning on that journey. But what we want is for them to be able to cope with all of the different technologies that they're going to be seeing. We want them to be able to continue learning enthusiastically and confidently. We want them to be able to communicate well with our clients. And we want them to be able to understand the broad basics of what's important when delivering software. So we don't, for instance, focus on a particular language or on, you know, knowing all the ins and outs of how to write algorithms or anything like that. What we focus on is that they can do test-driven development. So we put a really high focus on that. It's test-driven development from day one. We also put a really strong focus on collaboration. So they're pairing most of the time. They're either pairing or they're working ensembles. And we put a really strong focus on, I don't really like the term soft skills because I think it devalues it, but we put a really strong focus on their ability to communicate, collaborate, to work effectively within teams, to be empathetic, to be supportive, to be kind to one another, all of the people skills. We put a very strong focus on that. Yeah, so success looks like the ability to land on a project and cope.
Yeah, and I think that sounds like a great preparation for it, because yeah, I mean, you could spend a ton of time studying algorithms and diving deep into one tech, and then you find yourself on a team and you feel like you're swamped in people or collaboration or coordination or value stream problems, you know, systemic problems, right? And so yeah, so I think that sounds like a great introduction into the world of professional software engineering, and I like that a lot. Yeah, so one thing that came to mind is from what you said there, and then also what I've learned about the Academy online, is that you have a mix of solo, pair, and ensemble going on. And so I guess maybe what's the progression? Do they start solo? Do they, you know, and maybe how much of each? What's kind of the thinking there?
So in the very first week, in fact, within the very first few days, we hit them with all three, solo and pairing and ensemble working. And just in case people don't know, when I say ensemble, I mean mobbing, because I think that term is possibly still more frequently used. We don't use mob just because the word mob has slightly negative connotations, the idea of mob mentality, for instance. The individual stuff is really like, for instance, in the very first few days, we'll say you're going to need to get this stuff installed on your machine. And we also give them time every week for what we call self-learning, where it's up to them whether they work individually or not. But pretty much all of the time that we're coordinating their activities, which is most of the time, we're either putting them into pairs or we're putting them into ensembles. And what's really interesting is how much they love it. And I think, and it's interesting because if you speak to established software engineers, in my experience, who haven't been in an environment where it's mostly pairing, and I think that's most software engineers, to be fair. I don't think pairing is still that prevalent within the industry. And you suggest to them that they might have to pair all the time. Generally, my experience is that people are a bit like, oh, no, not sure about that. But when you take people right at the beginning of their journey, and also you have to remember that we are filtering for it. So we tell them right from the word go that this is what we want. We want people to work collaboratively, and there's going to be a lot of pairing. So if they didn't like the sound of that, they wouldn't be applying in the first place. But it is really interesting how much they love it. So for instance, one of the things that we do that I really love is while we're recruiting, we have these things that we call intro days. And this is very fresh in my mind because we have just had 3 intro days, literally. What day is it today? It's Thursday, isn't it? Yeah. So day before yesterday was the last of the last 3 intro days. So Tuesday, Monday, and Friday were our most recent intro days. And what happens there is that we select some candidates. So we shortlist some candidates, and the ones that are shortlisted are, I'm saying brought in, but it's all done remotely at the moment. But what we do is we bring them all onto a call, and we pair them with each other. And what we do is all day long, we put them in pairs. They're actually in 3s or 4s. So effectively, it's a pair of candidates plus 1 volunteer from MadeTech. So they're already a little mini ensembles, but effectively the candidates are pairing with each other. But then there's also somebody from MadeTech, and also it's not a kind of creepy you work and we'll just watch you. it's all 3 people working together. So it basically is an ensemble. And they generally use a driver navigator model. So they take it in turns.
Does that mean that there's somebody more experienced with the?
Yes. But it's interesting because they all refer to it as pairing. It feels like pairing to them. And I think that's because there are 2 people who are both candidates. Mm-hmm. And what we do is we really strongly encourage them to help each other. Mm-hmm. And really for us, that part of the assessment is that we are observing them. We just don't want it to feel like that. But we're paying attention to how well they work together and how much they help each other. So that idea that even though it's an interview and technically they are in competition, we don't want it to feel like that, and that's not the point of it. They're not competing against each other to see who can look best. What they're actually doing, what they should be doing, is trying to help each other, and that's what they'll get. They'll do well if they do help each other. That's what we want. But what's really interesting, what we do is, and it's no secret that we spend the day. Actually, I'm not going to say which language it is, because part of it's not a secret, but part of the point is that they will be learning it together. It's an unusual language. It's not one that's commonly used. We don't use it within MadeTech. So what that means is that our people are also new to it. So everybody's learning together, and we use koans. So what they do is they go through a series of koans, and nearly always they haven't come across it before, so they are actually learning, which is what we want. Partly because we want to watch them learn, but also because we want them to enjoy learning. We want them to have that experience. And at the end of the day, we always have a section where we encourage them all to tell us what their highlight of the day was. And the day consists of a little bit of a game at the beginning, then we send them off into groups, but at regular intervals during those groups, we pull them away individually and we interview them as well. So they also have one-to-one interviews. But the rest of the day, they're doing this exercise where they're doing these koans and learning this language. And in the highlight of the day at the end, they always just like nearly all of them say how much they loved working together. For a lot of them, it's the first time they've ever done it. And that experience, and I think it's very specific as well, because it's not just that you're learning, you're working together, it's that you're learning together. And because they're all still at the beginning of their journeys, and obviously they've all got those insecurities about, oh no, I don't know anything, I'm not clever enough. People always worry that maybe they're a bit slow, maybe they ask too many questions. We always make a very big point of saying, we want you to ask questions. No question is too stupid. Please do ask questions. If you're confused about anything, you're all in the same boat. We're deliberately giving you something that we don't expect you to know. This is not a test of your knowledge. And also we want you to help each other. So if one of you asks a question, we want the others to see whether they can answer it. And we also want you to Google stuff. You know, it's absolutely fine for you to Google everything, ask lots of questions. And having that experience with each other of learning together and seeing that they're not the only one who doesn't know stuff is always just incredibly enjoyable and valuable to them. And generally throughout the academy, that's what we do. We get them to learn together. So we either put them into pairs or we put them into ensembles. And what we want is them to help each other to learn. And I think that does vastly accelerate the learning. And people often say, you know, how refreshing it is, particularly when up to that point, a lot of them have been learning alone, they're self-taught, to suddenly be doing it with other people is an amazing experience for them.
And you had mentioned, you know, they're in competition with each other, but like the truth is that there's so many opportunities out there for good software engineers in general, that the more that we all help each other collectively, it just means more opportunity, you know. And so like that's, you know, so the more you help each other, then the better off you both are anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not like it's going to be a shortage of these positions.
And we do have limited places. We can't give everybody a place, but what we really want is for them to come away from the intro days having had a wonderful experience, being all fired up. And even if we can't offer them a place, that we've given them just that little bit of an extra push towards, you know, following this new path that they're on. And helping them to do it elsewhere. We also encourage people to reapply if they don't get in, but we want them to get something out of it, even if they don't get a place on the academy.
Nice. Yeah, it's what you're saying really resonates a lot with what we're looking for when we're hiring or working with less experienced. I love what you said about you're looking how well they help each other, right? So we recently did a intern interview process that was extremely similar to what you just described. I think the groups were slightly larger, but there was someone there to help facilitate and move it along, but they weren't part of the driver navigator rotation. And yeah, exactly what you said. You know, we're not looking for you to have all the answers. It's okay to Google, but the main goal is like, how well do you help others contribute ideas? How well do you learn? How do you help each other learn?
Yeah.
And I think I've seen the result of looking for that first, as opposed to, oh, who shows the best binary search tree during the interview, right? Is that those people really, the rate at which they learn and grow, and then they contribute so well in the mid to long term in any organization. They contribute immediately as well. But
yeah, exactly. And not particularly for us, because we're a consultancy. So we often work with blended teams, which is where you have a mixture of consultants and client engineers. And part of our role is to help our client engineers to learn. So as consultants, that's going to be part of the role. So we want our academy engineers to be doing that from day one. to be helping each other.
Yeah.
And it accelerates the learning. It makes them so much more rounded. It gets them used to working collaboratively. And it really shows. So, you know, everybody else within the organization always comments on how good the academy engineers are. And some they're often surprised because academy engineers will join them on projects and they're aware that these are junior engineers who are still very inexperienced, but they're always blown away by how good they are. And that's, you know, partly because we filtered for it, but also because we've just put them into this highly collaborative environment from day one. But it is interesting because you originally you asked me about the balance of individual working versus pairing versus ensemble working, and I kind of ended up talking about the intro days. So to talk about the academy itself, we absolutely do give them time to work individually. So generally at least 2 half days a week we just call self-learning time, and it's up to them what they do with that. So if they want to go off and work on their own, not a problem. We discourage them from working in the evenings and weekends, but I know that they do. I mean, you can't stop them. And I think that tends to be individual work. But what's really interesting is that during those set aside self-learning periods, they will often self-organize into more pairs and groups. You know, they will often set up little mini workshops or sessions. You know, somebody will have been struggling with something, somebody else will have solved it. They'll invite everybody into a little session, show them what they've learned. They might all be struggling with something and they'll all go into a session together to tackle it together. The pairs, there are some long-standing pairs. So mostly when we pair them, it's just random, and we just rely on Google Meet to come up with a random set of pairs. In the last academy, I used the pair stairs idea to make sure that we were mixing up the pairs as much as possible and that everybody was getting a chance to pair with everybody else. But there were 12 of them in that one, and there are 21 of them in this one. And actually that was an administrative overhead. And the other coach on the academy, Kyle, said to me, you know, we don't really need to do that. Let's just let Google Meet sort it out. You know, it'll be there are 21 of them. The chances of them ending up pairing with the same person are relatively small, so let's just assume that it will get mixed up automatically. So they pair with lots of different people on individual workshops, but we also do have, and again it's assigned more or less randomly, one long-standing pair that lasts for a few weeks where they work on one thing, so they get that continuity of working on a larger piece of software. That's for the first 7 weeks, and then for the last 5 weeks that we split them into teams of 4 or 5 and they work together on a long-term project. But in the first 7 weeks, they just do get this experience of working with lots of different people. So that's the pairing side of things, but we do also use ensembles. And what is interesting, which might surprise you, and I'm still not sure if it's because we somehow did it wrong, initially, when we were looking at the timetable and thinking about how we wanted to introduce particular topics, there were some topics, particularly getting them started on TDD, where we thought, if we were to just say to them, do some TDD and just send them off into pairs, having done a brief introduction, what we thought was they're likely to struggle a bit. And, I think one of the things that a lot of people say is if the best way to learn TDD is with a coach, is with somebody who's experienced, with a mentor, with somebody who can actually help you through it, because you can read as many books as you like, but the way you learn TDD is by practice. And it really helps to have somebody at your elbow who can guide you through that. And we were worried that if we just put them in pairs and send them off, they'll get stuck, or we won't be there to help guide them. So what we thought was, let's do it in mini ensembles, and that way we can always be there with them, and we can help to coach them through it. We can, try and be as hands off as possible, but we can help to kind of guide them in a good direction. And the way we worked it out, because there are 21 of them and 2 of us, we worked out this system where we would split the cohort in two, so it would be 10 in one half and 11 in the other half, and then we would split those into two. So Kyle and I would both be working simultaneously with one group of 5 or 6. And those would make a decent size of ensemble, because we did briefly try having 10 people in an ensemble, and it didn't work brilliantly. We had an interesting technique, which wasn't the worst, but what we did was we said there will always be 5 people who are active in the ensemble, and then there will be 5 or 6 people who are not active, who are observers, and we will rotate in a kind of circular fashion. So every time you fall off one end, you come back in at the other end, and we'll rotate every 5 minutes, which means that every 5 minutes, the 5 people that are active is changing slightly, because one person's dropping off one end and one person's coming back in at the other end. And there will always be 5 or 6 people who are observing. So they're just watching what's happening and trying to pay attention, which wasn't that. I almost think maybe that was more successful than when we put them into ensembles, because what I'm going to say is that in that first week, it kind of blew their minds, because as well as learning TDD, as well as getting used to the academy, as well as meeting each other, as well as getting their laptops to work, because we'd given them all new laptops, they were also trying to learn how to do an ensemble. And it was too many things, and particularly the ensemble, I mean, maybe particularly when we had them in groups of 10 and they're being observed by 5 people, it was quite daunting for them. So the observer role was quite good, but the being observed role was a bit like, because they didn't quite know what they were doing. And even when we had them in groups of 5, what most of them were saying was it was just too much pressure, because they felt like they were being watched. And the way we did it with the 5, one of them would be what we call a typist, which I got from Emily Bache, rather than driver, because I think most people, or a lot of people, struggle with driver and navigator. Which one's which? If you know about what is it, Grand Prix, then it makes sense to you, because you're used to that idea. If you don't, then it's harder. Because for me, as a driver, and I'm not used to the idea of having a navigator. Generally, when I'm driving, I am the navigator. So for me, the idea of driving is being in charge. When you're the driver, you're making stuff happen, and you're also deciding which direction to go in. And so it's not obvious to me that a driver is more of a passive role. And I always struggle. I always have to think, hang on, which one is which? What does the driver do? Whereas if you call the driver the typist, it's much clearer. The typist is the person who types. So anyway, that was just a little aside, but
I like that.
Yeah, something that Emily Bache likes to do, and I got that from her, and I think that works really well. But anyway, what we were doing was we were having one typist, 4 navigators, and the rest were observers, and every 5 minutes it rotated, so somebody else became the typist. And the typist would feel quite exposed, and the navigators would also feel quite exposed, even when there were only 5 of them, because they were all worried. They were all just even we tried so hard to reassure them, but they were all in panic mode, and they were all kind of, I don't know what's going on. They were struggling to follow it, because it was all new to them. And even though we kept saying it's okay to ask questions, it's okay to pause, it's okay to check your understanding, I think also the fact that we were rotating every 5 minutes meant that, everything kept changing really fast. They didn't have time to kind of get used to what they were doing. And they were just, they would be like, I'm not quite sure what we're doing now or why we're doing it. Whereas when we put them into pairs, they would all go, oh God, that's so much nicer, because there's only 2 of us. And we can constantly check each other for our understanding. And there's only one other person that you have to worry about if you are stuck or confused. You can both pause and start Googling. So we actually, based on their feedback, because one of the things, particularly in the first week, we have daily retros, we also have weekly retros. We're constantly checking in with them about how things are going, and the feedback that we got was, we don't like ensembling. And so we were a bit surprised, because we had thought the ensembles would help people to learn and would help us to help them to learn, because we would be able to be in the ensembles. But actually that's not how it turned out, and I'm still not sure if it's because if we could have tweaked it and made it work better. But so we took, for the second week we hardly did any, and then in the third and fourth weeks we started introducing it again. And then it went much better, because by that time they'd done a lot of pairing, they'd done a lot of learning, they were used to TDD, they're much more used to TDD. They had questions that they understood. If you see, sometimes when you're right at the beginning, you have questions that you don't even understand your own questions. You're not even sure what it is that you don't understand. It's just all a bit overwhelming. But by the third and fourth weeks, they knew what their questions were. And so when we started to guide them with things, it made more sense to them. And they really felt the value of the ensemble. So I think next time we might actually not do ensembling in the first week or two, maybe. Or just think about how, well, I say we, actually, I won't be there, because I'm moving on to new adventures. But Kyle will. So Kyle will be taking all of these learnings forward.
Nice. Yeah. I've seen the same thing happen before too. And I might be butchering it, Chris. You might have to correct me. Is if you introduce too many changes at once, the satir change is just like too steep for people to comprehend. We were this past semester, we were mobbing once a week with college students. And the first mob session or two was a bit chaotic. It was a higher number of people. It started to sound similar to what you were talking about, where people weren't as engaged and weren't quite understanding what was going on. And so we retroed about it and talked about it. And I think it was just too much. It was just like everyone was getting used to each other. We were just starting the project with them. And so there was a lot of satir buildup. And so we decided was just to split into smaller pairs or mobs to start with. And then the students would ask for larger mobs at times when we were doing something that everyone wanted to be a part of or whatever. But yeah, I think taking the larger numbers down to smaller has helped in some cases. And then in other cases, I've seen, students or people who've never ensembled together, they're in a large ensemble and it goes really well. And so there's no need for the split. So it's maybe one of those inspect and adapt kind of things. Yeah. And so, every situation is different. Yeah. So thanks for sharing that experience. And I think that is a good takeaway, that it can be too much in certain circumstances to introduce it at certain times. So.
There's a term, the fluent edge, learning on the fluent edge, right? Where it's like, just at the edge of their fluency is kind of is going to be that where you're comfortable enough to move forward. And if you're not on the fluent edge, I think I got this from Willem Larson, but if you're way outside of that fluent edge, then you're gonna have a lot of either imposter syndrome or whatever it might be, and so bringing the visibility down sometimes can make people feel a little safer in those situations. But identifying where the fluent edge is can also help with that, right? And so maybe they're less comfortable with programming in general, so maybe TDD and mobbing, learning them both at the same time is not as easy as maybe writing an algorithm together without TDD as a mob, and then adding TDD in as something to gradually increment on as well. But I think that rather than one experiment is, rather than changing the ensemble size, is to change the content to be something that they already know. And so I especially see this often in conference talks and open spaces when we do a code dojo, and that's where you have multiple pairs rotating people, and it's the same problem but different languages. And I recently did one where it was a kata that no one has done before, and different languages at every station. And so people were trying to figure out the kata as well as the language. And one of the languages was closure and one of them was go. And so as we were rotating through, everybody's like, I had no idea what the language was. I had no idea what this was and that was. So I think that it could be that the comfort level there is not only related to ensembling, but also to this idea that the problem space might be so foreign. And yeah, maybe going down to pairs so that learning to work with other people is good too. And yeah, like I said, just the flip side of that is a problem that they've all seen before. And so in code dojos, I like using FizzBuzz because a lot of people have seen it before.
Yeah. You were talking about the I've forgotten already, but something edge.
Oh, the fluent edge.
The fluent edge. And that reminds me of a diagram that we show during the intro days, during the intro to each intro day. We always show them a diagram that's just 3 concentric rings. But the middle ring is much thinner than the middle of the. There is a circle in the middle that is the middle of the circle, and then there is a ring around the circle, and that is quite thin, and then there is a fat ring around that is the outside of the circle. Thin ring in between the other two is what we call the learning zone. So the one in the middle is the comfort zone, and then there's that thin ring around that, and then outside of that is the fat panic zone. And what we talk to them about is how ideally during the intro day we don't want them to be in the comfort zone, but we also don't want them to be in the panic zone, and so we want them to all be helping each other to find that learning zone. So we want them to be challenged, we don't want them to be bored, which would be the comfort zone, but we also don't want them to spill over into the panic zone, which we're acknowledging right from the beginning is a definite possibility. So we want them all to be looking out for that panic zone in themselves and each other, and helping each other back into the learning zone when they find themselves in the panic zone. And I think that's also what we're talking about, isn't it? And I think maybe we basically
I mean that's exactly the fluent edge. I think is that analogy is exactly it, because once you're off in the land of complete unknown, then there's a chain of dependencies of knowledge, and then the comfort zone, people can just do those things without thinking about them at all. But I do think that the first time somebody does an ensemble, the problem space that they're working in probably should be in the comfort zone. So because the fluent edge is not the problem they're working on. The fluent edge is the interactions between typist and navigator and navigator of the navigator, and all those different roles that may exist.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Cool.
Thank you for helping me to kind of identify that. What's really interesting from our point of view is that we put a very high premium on test-driven development.
Yes,
we really want them to be doing that from day one. So the question then is, how do we find the comfort zone within the ensemble context? And I wonder maybe whether the answer is to actually give them a bit of time in pairs to get used to TDD before we do ensembles, or whether we do just find something really, really trivial. I suppose another possibility, sorry, I'm thinking aloud now, but another possibility is that we start a session by running through a very, very trivial coding problem that's barely even a kata, and we actually solve it in front of them. We say, hey, look, here's an approach, and then we get them to try and reproduce that in the ensemble.
And so in our interviews for senior candidates, even a lot of the people that apply with us, they don't have any experience doing ensembles, and so that the interview itself is in an ensemble. And so we became very aware when we first started interviewing people that there was panic just setting in from ensembling for the first time in the interview. And so The very first thing that our candidates go through is a extremely trivial problem that they do by themselves in front of someone else, and then they're brought into an ensemble and they do the exact same problem just by verbalizing the code for the first time. And usually just that little bit is enough to then have them navigate the whole rest of the interview, and it's fine. But that little change was the difference for us between panic and kind of fluent edge learning.
You see, what I'm now thinking is, why do we not have a problem in our intro days, given that these koans are quite challenging because they're in a language that most of them have never seen before, and so either we're putting them in a position, so this thing of the highlight of the day at the end, where they all say what an amazing time they had and how much, and they all really kind of apparently genuinely talk about how much they enjoyed the group work. So there's two possibilities. Either there's something about the conditions, and I have a theory about what it might be, that means that we're setting them up for success, or they're telling us what we want to hear, and actually they're all having a horrible time and it's terrifying. Which is a possibility.
That's very possible during an interview.
Well, exactly. But I wonder if actually it's because they're smaller groups, so there's only ever 3 or 4 people all together, 2 or 3 candidates, mostly 2. It's only 3 when we have an odd number of people, 2 or 3 candidates, and then 1 person from Made Tech. So there's a much higher ratio of experienced people to inexperienced people, we do put a lot of effort into saying, it doesn't matter how much progress you make. We don't care how much progress you make. This is just supposed to be interesting and fun for you, and you can all help each other, and we're going to help you. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's enough scaffolding, and the fact that the groups are smaller, or maybe they're just telling us what we want to hear.
Well, I think that just in general, bringing people into that comfortable space, like, that's totally reasonable. And it is really a process of experimentation, but also when after you've hired them, I think that's the time to do the retrospective with the people that you hired, because then, they're much more likely to give you that brutal honesty. And then I also like this, put more increments, right? So in any places that you're experiencing problems or uncertainty, in additional increments like that a lot of the time, that's really helpful. So it's just maybe add 1 person at a time, or something like that.
I agree with what you're saying, Claire, where I've seen that too, where I feel sometimes it's the gut feel, like, oh, I feel like this session has a higher chance of panic zone instead of that learning zone, right? And so for me, smaller numbers and higher guidance usually helps that out, whether it's pair or ensemble. But and I also thought it was really interesting too, your thoughts about what order to do things, to pair first, then TDD, or TDD, then pair, or pair TDD together, and I've seen it, I think, happen every way around, where some people have learned to ensemble first, and then through ensembling with someone, they learn TDD well, or they learned a TDD well, and then the next thing they learn is ensemble or pair. And so, but I think, like Chris was saying, usually 1 at a time is I've seen. But some people, there's a rare group, and I think I'm in this rare group, where I like to jump in the deep end. I want to learn, I want to jump into
Sink
a
or
team,
swim.
learn 8 things at once. But I'm more weird like that. So, but we are hitting the end of our time box. And thank you so much for this conversation. We've really, it's been great, good learning for us. And before we close the show, is there anything you'd like to share or plug?
So I'm about to go freelance, so I am going to be available as a technical coach for helping people to learn ensembling and pairing and TDD and refactoring and good software engineering practices. And I've got a few events coming up. So I'm speaking at Lead Dev London, and I'm speaking at Joy of Coding in Rotterdam in June, which I'm really looking forward to. That looks like a fantastic event. And I'm also doing a couple of talks and a workshop at SDD Conf in London in May. That's probably but sorry, I should also say that I'm running an online workshop for O'Reilly on refactoring on the 28th of April.
Awesome.
Fantastic stuff. Great. Well, thanks again for being on the show, and to our audience, please like and subscribe, and we love feedback on YouTube. Twitter, and more. And yeah, please share this episode with someone if they're learning or seeking ways to help inexperienced people come to learn how great practices like TDD, pairing and ensembling, and yeah, just about learning in general. Great ways to some concepts to think about and apply and experiment, inspect, adapt. And until next time, have a good one, everybody. Mob well, and see you later.
Thank you for having me. See you.